Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Daniela Danna, a research fellow and lecturer at the University of Salento in Lecce, Italy. She holds a PhD in sociology and social research from the University of Trento. In addition to several titles in Italian, Daniela is the author of 2 books in English, Contract Children, Questioning Surrogacy, and Procreation and Population in Historical Social Science. Les Éditions Sans Fin have just published the French translation of her book about love between women in Western history, L'amour entre femmes dans l'histoire occidentale. I welcome Daniela Danna to Savage Minds. I wanted to start off by talking about how gender ideology has taken root in Italy, both within the legal system and within academia. And when I came here in 2019, I heard a lot about the Lecce Zan, the Zan Bill, which defined gender identity as something perceived and displayed by the individual, which is in parallel with much of what was proposed within countries like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and the US in various states. Why do critics like yourself argue that this undermines the legal status of biological sex?
Well, that's that's why they want to introduce gender ideology. That's the purpose. The purpose is to make sex legally invisible, and this opens the doors to changing youth's bodies as they please, because the ideology says that sex is not important, that we are now we have the science to change sex. So you can choose your own, and even to choose, you can even choose not to have a sex. This is the analysis that I found in the work of Jennifer Bilek, and I'm really persuaded that she uncovered what is the motive for overhauling the whole society into this concept of not thinking about our bodies as something given, but something that we can play with, we can modify it as we please. And I add to that the consciousness of being in a capitalist society, which is where capital is looking for ever new fields of making profits, and making people believe that science is able to even change their sex is a big source of profits. Even though I must say that now this project is really trembling because of the compensations that have been given to the first teenagers, the first people who, as teenagers, decided to change their bodies. The point of taking youth into this ideology is exactly this, that when you're young, you don't think about the consequences of what you're doing. And I'm really struck by the fact that I see even in Europe, not just in the States or in other woke countries, that in Germany, for example, there are already kindergarten where they teach children at such an early age that there is gender identity, and you can change your sex easily if you don't feel that you are fitting with the gender identity that is assigned to your body. It's a huge market. It's a huge possibility of making profits because then, as we know, you become dependent on medications for the rest of your life. Italy, in all this, is backwards, and I'm really glad about that. And we did obtain a victory as feminists back in 2021 when the proposal of law by Alessandro Zan was presented. So when the law proposal of Alessandro Zan was presented, it was presented as if gender identity was something that would not affect anyone. So this is the strategy of making it look as an extension of rights that don't change much else in society. This is there is this reassurance, there is this presentation of transgenders and transsexuals as victims of society that need to be protected over everybody else. I'm not denying that there are issues with being transgender in Italy or in any other parts of the world, but there are also other people who are affected by this patriarchal and capitalist society. And like women who are victims of violence, that they don't want to be speaking with somebody who's presenting as a woman, but is in fact a man when they go to shelters or to rape centers. So in Italy, this law proposal was not negotiable. This is what is interesting about the whole process. The feminists inside the Democratic Party and the feminists outside, and everybody who would care about what was proposed, because we knew what had happened in other countries, like the States, like some of the United States, like in Canada, Australia, and so on. So I wasn't particularly vocal at that moment, but the feminists were asking for a change in this law proposal, mentioning instead of gender identity, gender expression. So people would be protected in case they were victim of violence or discrimination for their gender expression, not for their gender identity. And this was refused.
Well, I have to ask, what does that even mean? Because all of the ideology, and I've been working on this project since 2012, it's steeped in homophobia, it's steeped in misogyny, and it's also steeped in a complete ignorance of reality, because even they know that sex is immutable. They know this. It's not like people wanting a surrogate are running to men claiming to be women. That's not happening.
They don't.
And it's also fascinating to me because I was in the thick of it in 2013. And when I had death threats about a piece I wrote and had to leave the UK for several months, I realized that the lobby behind these people, just like in Italy, is well funded. However, I do not agree that this is purely about making money, because if it were about making money, they're not making all that much money given the numbers. And as we see now with the detransitioners, they're losing them quickly because there are more detransitioners today than there are people transitioning, according to many reports I have read. And it seems that the detransitioners will be more and more and more in the coming years. I have to wonder then, what was this about? In Italy, who is Alessandro Zan? Why did he do this? And why is it when I go to any Archie Gay online, it turns my stomach? It's every time it's about oggi a trans, something is trans something, right? It's every day, il giorno della memoria della morte dei trans. And I'm just like, who cares? And I'm sorry to say this, but people are dying in wars all over us right now and very near to Italy. There's a genocide very near.
I'm not saying that I don't care about that. But it's true that trans people who are murdered, they are murdered often in the setting of prostitution, by so-called clients, by violent men who hate themselves because they look for somebody who is not a woman, and then they take a revenge or pouring out their own violence against the other. But and this is not something that the movement is saying out loud, because they're always complaining about the victims and they never complain about what they call sex work. They are in favor of legalizing it. So this is another contradiction. Well, it might be that they don't make so much money anymore, but they did, and the project was interesting from the point of view of capital, because this is an attempt of persuading younger and younger people that they can change their bodies thanks to science and technology. And this is in the framework of transhumanism that is strongly pushed by the World Economic Forum. And transhumanism is the idea that science now is so good and powerful that we will overcome death, that we will be able to download our thoughts, our brain, and live forever, and so on. So it's publicity, it's advertisement. And they have not ceased to try to put this ideology into young people's minds. And this is also where it has become more powerful, because the trans feminist movement that is mainly made by young women and young men has swallowed this ideology completely.
Especially within the gay community, because now it's almost taboo to say homosexual or gay or lesbian. Everyone is queer. And I wonder, why are you disappearing specificity of desire, right? That's also being erased.
No, but this is, I see it really as something that is an ideology that is spread by the so-called elite, who is in charge, who's administering the money that comes from the state or for private donors. And they are producing websites, leaflets that are spreading this ideology. They want to get in schools. They've been able to do this also in order to talk about this. But, and it's true that the young people are calling themselves queer, but we still have a lot of gays and lesbians in Italy. And I see this change of the movement from being gay and lesbian to being LGBTQ, etc., as the turning point. Gender ideology now is inscribed into this new movement. I don't know how young people can tolerate that if they discover that they are homosexuals, then they find that they cannot be homosexuals anymore. They cannot be homosexual anymore in this movement, because you need to accept bodies that are of the opposite sex, as if they were of your own sex. So this is something that is wreaking havoc on the minds of young people, I suppose. And there is very little opposition at the moment. I see that there are some lesbians that are feminists, but they hide from their peers. I'm talking about young people here. We are still there, the older generation of the gay and lesbian movement, and I think there's not so much public opposition, but I think that people who were in that movement, they have started seeing this game that is not conducive to a better social acceptance of homosexuality.
Well, in Italy, you have all these archie gay groups that now have turned sort of archie queer and LGBT, plus, plus, plus. And I find it very disconcerting when I go to see even their social media output, and it's more trans than anything else. And as you probably know, most dating websites, not just in the Anglophone sphere, but here, are very trans populated. So you can't even be sure that you're actually talking to a woman, and you could feasibly be kicked off of the app should you raise an objection. And this is something that's been going on for over 15, 20 years now in Anglophone countries. What do you see younger generations of gay men and women, what do they say about this? Because on the one hand, you and I might agree on all these issues and the obviety of it all, yet the younger generation have been cooked. They've been part of the ideological build. They've been taught that sex isn't between your legs, it's between your ears. They've reversed sex and gender. They've been taught that gender is somatic.
This has become their ideology against the older generation. I would, I, I think that they will see for themselves when, if they are gays and lesbians, they would not like to be forced to have personal contact with the opposite sex people, and they will start realizing this. We don't have also so many trans youth. It's in the hundreds, it's not in the thousand as in the Anglophone countries. Um, and maybe this is the moment where, with the CAS review, with the other review that was made in the States, in the same that goes in the same direction of the CAS review, with the processes that have given compensation to young women. Maybe this is starting to reverse itself in Italy as well, and we also have other European countries that have changed this. And Portugal now has who had laws against supporting the idea of gender identity is making a big step backwards and is giving full credit to sex and not gender anymore. So these are clear signs that somehow people are starting to realize what this is all about. But our elite, and I'm talking about the EU, I'm talking about the EU Commission, which is not elected, is put in place by the different governments. They have just published last year, at the end of last year, this new LGBT strategy that requires member states to outlaw so-called conversion therapies, which is in fact the possibility of having a therapy for young people, especially if they feel they are of the opposite sex, just trying to understand why, if they have other issues, what makes them hate their body. It's not very healthy to hate your own body. So, but this is I think this is a point in favor of my interpretation in terms of money making, that the EU is pushing for imposing this gender ideology and shutting up all the psychotherapy, um, all the psychologists and psychiatrists who would try to help this.
Gatekeeping.
Yeah, they call it
Yeah, they're
gatekeeping.
called gatekeepers.
Yeah, no, this is a very badly connotated.
Yeah, in Europe, it's a foolish game to play then, because the same thing that has happened in the Netherlands and in Sweden and in the UK will happen here as well. And although the fees that will be asked of the courts in a civil suit will not be on the order of what is happening in the US, where millions will be handed to any detransitioner, and quite easily so, it still will cost the public purse. And the public can be quite angry about this. They already are in Italy, because I think people have this feeling like, okay, you asked us to accept same sex couples and then the pacts, and then this is nothing to do with, even heterosexuals understand that this is nothing to do with sexual desire. And then the other side of this that I find quite offensive is that I'm being lobbed in a category with people with serious psychiatric problems in many respects. A lot of these people, men and women alike, have serious problems and they deserve medical and psychiatric care, but that has nothing to do with me. And let's say I were 20 again. I relied very heavily in my teens and 20s on the gay community. What message is this sending to young gay men and women that you're medical patients now? We've gone back to the 1950s, haven't we?
Yes, exactly. No, it's very sad. It's a very sad turn of events. Um, we have the church, we have a parliamentary majority on the right side, and they are gaining more popularity because they are against this. I'm very worried because what I consider to be my side, the leftist side, has embraced the gender ideology. The Democratic Party, which is a neoliberal party that I never voted for, but still it stands on the left side of parliament, they have embraced this with the Secretary Schlein.
Ellie Schlein has done great damage. During lockdown, I tried to reach her in her office in Bologna to talk with her about the
Hmm.
damage being done by lockdown. She doesn't respond to the media.
Hmm.
And these leaders in this country
Hmm.
don't respond to media at all, at all. And so the
Hmm.
arrogance of taking this mantra of gay liberation, allegedly, and turning it into something that's quite homophobic oppression, I take issue with.
It's the la trahison des élites, come on the can you say the il tradimento dell'elite that has been studied also by sociologists, in because they have been left without a cause after the approbation of civil unions in Italy, because they have conquer seats in parliament, so they want to keep on with being in politics without while, in fact, as Giovanni Dall'Orto said, the gay movement has won. So we shouldn't keep on. We have a lot of things to do to integrate ourselves more in society, because, of course, this is not still, there's still a lot of homophobia everywhere. But the legislation has been changed, so we don't need to push it further to make it like the famous revolution, which is a 30, 60-degree circle that brings you back in the same position of homophobia under another name, of misogyny, as you also underlined, which is one of the forces that is pushing gender ideology, evidently, the division between men and non-men, for example, that I find somewhere. I'm working on a book called Gender Package, and I'm finding the same BS that is everywhere in the States, in Canada, also in Italy. There are universities that are publishing these glossaries where you find the definition of what is gender and which is trumping sex and so on. So for me, this movement is turned into something else that is full of requests that are pushing back women's position in society, like the request for legalization of what they call sex work, like the legalization or the introduction of surrogacy, and of course, the what we have been talking about, the transing of kids, and the idea that men can be women. If women want to be men, this is not really challenging. Patriarchy is not really challenging. It's not really dangerous for the other men, but the other way around it is, as we've seen also in sport. Uh, Wolf in the States, they say that they are legalizing women's battering in sports, in all the contact sports. You risk now physical injuries that are very serious if you are playing against men. So this gender package is interesting because it comes really as a proposal that cannot be discussed, cannot be changed. I made the example of how during the discussion on the Zan decree, they refused to they refused a compromise. They really wanted to get the idea of gender identity into the law, while saying it doesn't change anything. But then this is not negotiable. And back 9 years ago, Archie Lesbica was pushed out of the LGBT, what they call community, which is not really a community, is a political grouping, because they did not accept surrogacy as a goal for the movement. It has been a serious split. and they've been treated as pariahs after that. So this is really something that is building up on misogyny, of which we have a lot in the gay scene, even though they don't want to call themselves gay anymore or whatever, but still we find that attitude of being mm, contemptuous of women quite a lot. And we cannot deny this. Lots of lesbians didn't want to work with gay men in the movement because of this. So this is a factor that is pushing this gender package.
But when I look at all the archigay from Bologna to here, all around Emilia Romagna, you have these women pushing trans rights, not the men. It's women pushing it. And this is something I've noticed across the countries. It's invariably women at the helm of these organizations pushing it. So we can't really blame men. I hate to say it, but women are largely the pushers of this ideology. And a lot of it goes back to the managerial classes. And my my thoughts on this are very clear. I've talked about this in other episodes, but when Crixivan came onto the market, protease inhibitors, and that ended AIDS as a death blow. It meant that AIDS could be handled much like diabetes. But from there, what do all these charities or NGOs do? They didn't want to shut their doors. They had tens of thousands of people employed in the gay liberation sector, working on AIDS, drugs, housing of men who survived their partners, getting kicked out of their homes. I was in New York in the thick of it. What did they do? They transitioned to the trans ideology, and that became a huge moneymaker. And I think there need to be laws across the West about NGOs that start and don't end. I think there need to be expiration dates on all charities.
Yeah, but the money they make, it comes from governments and it comes from private donors.
Of course.
And as I wanted to specify it also, I talked about this LGBT strategy of the EU, and I have to say that in Italy we do have gender recognition above sex, thanks to the verdict by the European Courts of Human Rights back in 2017 that has been must be accepted by Italian courts. So somebody with a can have a gender recognition certificate and have his or her documents change to the other sex without changing their body. Because we did have this possibility, it was a law approved in 1984, but they had to go through a process which was requested by transsexuals. It was not imposed on them. Now they're talking about medical violence on trans bodies, but it was really the request of people who wanted, who were adults, who were still hating their bodies so much that for them it was better, they were better off by changing their bodies than by accepting them. And I can respect that. I'm not in their own skin, and if somebody tells me that they will be better off, there's a good chance that they will be. I know in the movement there were many trans, both F2M or M2F, and I don't want to question that. But this is not something for young people. This is to young people. You have to say you have your own sex. You cannot really change it. It's cosmetics. It's a social agreement to change your documents, but you stay with your sex. So you better try and be good and feel good in your own body, which is also a great message from feminism in the 60s and the 70s that women's bodies don't need to be changed. We don't need to be ashamed of what we are. And now this youth ideology is going against all this. So the European Courts of Human Rights, they decided that it was a human right to have one's gender identity recognized. And this has been overhauled to the Italian juridical system, even if we don't have a law that has changed the original one of 84. But the layer above Italian government, so the EU and the Council of Europe, they have been imposing this. So there is clearly an interest by states and companies and the capitalist system to promote this. They don't care about individual rights. They absolutely, we have seen this in many circumstances. And probably they also like this perverted twist of fate that now the LGBT movement that was about public recognition of homosexuality is advocated for the public destruction of homosexuality, and we don't have to forget this, about the public destruction of heterosexuality as well, because they are also, it doesn't exist anymore within gender ideology. Because if your sex is between your ears, then you can't be heterosexual anymore. So maybe heterosexuals should start to think more about this and see that they're not defending a marginalized group if they have sympathy for transgenders, whatever it be, because transgender is an absurd concept, as very different from transsexual. Transsexual refers to the cosmetic changes to your body to pass for the other sex. While transgender, what is that? Everybody is transgender. There are no people who are absolutely stereotyped as genders are. So this is another problem with gender ideology, that they are promoting a concept that is encompassing every human being as if it was something particular, something special. Oh, I'm transgender because I don't obey the rules. And the only conceptual change that this is promoting now is to reinforce those stereotypes of what is a man and what is a woman.
Yes, although this isn't just a younger generational movement. In fact, we're starting to see that kids in their teens and early 20s are pushing back against this. This is something in the order of people in their 30s and 40s. I've even known people, older people, who thought it was cool and they themselves went in for it. It was like this, it is a fad. And I think it's important that those of us on the left stop tippy toeing around feelings. I worry, like when you say things like, it's bad for kids, but adults are free to do what they want. Well, there's a problem there. Kids model their behavior on what adults do, and adults are creating an ideology through praxis that has been reinforced by legislation, votes in various
Yeah,
camera. I very much worry that in Italy, where I see gay and lesbians in their 30s meeting up to discuss the quote unquote rights of these quote unquote trans people. I think we need to start questioning this ideology in and of itself, because recently I met someone through a friend and we were talking, and he was shocked that I didn't kowtow to the trans Borg. And he said, but those are people, but they're very delicate and they kill themselves. And I said to him, loads of people kill themselves. I've lived through lockdown here. Why aren't you talking to me about suicide from lockdown? Because that's a much higher percentage than people killing themselves because they didn't get their testosterone. And he was shocked. At the end of a half hour conversation, he's gay. He was there with his boyfriend. At the end of a half hour conversation, I found out what his profession was. You will be shocked to learn that the man was a medical doctor. Okay? And I'm
yeah,
thinking,
but we know how they behaved during the lockdown. They all obeyed, most of them.
yes, but a medical doctor knows that sex does not change, no matter how much estrogen or how much testosterone you take. And I think it's time that those of us on the left, not just in the gay community either, that we speak clearly about this, because I find it really daunting that 20 years on, and loads of people have lost jobs over this, as you probably know. In the UK, censorship abounds. people have had the police rock up to their doors for a post they made on social media. So I've got to wonder, like, who is Alessandro Zan? Who pushed him to make this bill? Because how did the bill, in essence, attempt to balance the criminalization of hate speech with the right to free expression in terms of censorship laws that have come up as well? And you've got the whole fear
Mhm.
of gagging, right? So the Lecce Zan sought to protect both women from misogyny and the LGBT, quote unquote, LGBT individuals, but no one's saying that trans is a fiction. And I think that's an important thing to say for those of us on the left. People on the right are saying it, and I have to agree with them. Why is the left in Italy so fearful of saying that transgender is just a discourse steeped in homophobia and misogyny? Why can't people say that on the left?
Oh, okay. That's a big question because I'm saying that. So I'm not the right person to ask why they don't. First of all, we don't have a real left anymore in parliament. So I wouldn't call the Democratic Party or even the others as left. Then we have a big question, a big issue about how the left, even the radical left, has behaved when they were told to keep quiet, shut themselves up in their homes, and take a very doubtable medical product for preventing an illness that was killing the old and those who already had a lot of health problems. So this is a mystery to me too, why the left is not. It's a big step back for the whole of society that we are left with the very small minorities who are fighting against these abuses of power, these attempts of changing the laws, or even going about without changing the laws, because, as I told you, gender identity it is recognized in Italy. But back to our discussion of the theme of our discussion, I would still make a difference between the law on transsexuality and transgenders. I do agree with you that transgender is a product of misogyny, of homophobia, and it is an attack on bodies, on young people's bodies. I would still make a distinction with adults because while young people might believe that they are changing sex, of course, older people don't believe that. They know it's a social arrangement, and if they do believe that, they are screened. This is the what happened with the 84 law, that they have to go to a commission and present themselves and their motives for changing. And if the commission finds that they have mental health issues, so they are treated for that. They are not allowed to change sex. So and the numbers of that was so small. I cannot quote it, but I was it was like one in 100,000, if I remember correctly, in Italy. So it was really small numbers, mostly men who wanted to change sex, a few women who did, and it wasn't affecting society in the way that the transgender movement is affecting society. So you might still say, but this was a bad example for youth because the state was approving this. But I would say there was no, before gender identity ideology, it wasn't an issue. It was something that we could cope with as a society, having these small minorities and having them have their ways with their bodies, even though, of course, it's not very healthy to do it. But I also personally saw that these people were saying, presenting themselves as much better after that. I know that there's some regret. I know even that there are statistics made in Sweden that show that famous suicide rate is higher for people who have done the transition than for the rest of the population. But still, I believe that an adult can make their own decisions. And when we talk about trans, maybe we should say transgender. in order not to, because another victim of all this is transsexuals, is those people who have who wanted the law that was approved in Italy in '84, and they've been using the law to change their sex and live their lives. And this has become now a preoccupation for the whole society, um, and they are caught in these cultural wars, and they cannot. And we have to say in their face that you cannot change sex. This is something that I regret, because I think this is I would be able to accommodate this small minority. But now we are talking about a much bigger wave of young people who have never gone to uh, gender clinics before, that they are they say that they are convinced to be transsexuals, and we cannot accept this. We cannot accept the mutilation of minors who cannot decide even whether they can get a tattoo or not. So this whole discussion and the support by the left of these positions of the gender package is really a mystery to me. I cannot help you in finding out why. I think as a society we are more and more detached from our bodies. We are more detached from nature. We live artificial lives, and the young people are more and more online. They stay there and they believe they don't have a body. The body is just something to support their online activities. And they can be anything else, like they can do in cyberspace. So these are the root causes of the problem, that we are not living a sustainable life anymore, because we need the nature. We cannot treat nature as our society is currently doing. We cannot think that we don't need connections with our environment, because it is our environment who's supporting us. So all this is the idea of transhumanism that is taking hold of society and is defended and promoted by those who have power.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. You use the term M to F, F to M. And I'm thinking, why are you even using that then? Because we can't, again, say that trans is okay if you're an adult, but not if you're a child. Or trans was fine when it was a few people, but not a lot. I think the problem in root, in fact, I'm not thinking this, I'm quite certain of this given my research on the subject, is the entire field of trans ideology, including the true trans, is quite problematic. A lot of these folks who transitioned, even if in fewer numbers in the 70s and 80s, yes, they have oftentimes gender dysphoria, what's called now gender dysphoria, and they lobbied very long to have the DSM changed. So every time there's a DSM now, we can count on a new change. They even wanted it delisted from any kind of psychiatric evaluation, which not all of them were in agreement, because they said if we do that, then it won't be covered by our insurance companies. So I think it's really important that we start to talk frankly about what transgender is, because I don't I don't believe in true trans. I don't believe that there's someone who's really, really in the wrong body. Because if I believe that, first I'd probably be a Christian. It does fit in with very medieval notions of Christianity. And I don't think we can pretend that we own our body as if it were this kind of soul that we can convert through faith in a supreme. And this is something that's concerned me, to see youth that I don't believe that they even think that they're the opposite sex. I think that there's a trend because of an aporia of social connection, first of all. All of this kicked off into huge numbers during the surge of and the birth of social media. And that's not a coincidence. So I'm wondering, here in Italy, where things are thankfully tamed by the church and the right. How do you deal with the fact that, as someone on the left, you having to ally yourself with people on the right, like La Lega and Fratelli, etc., like all these groups that are very clear about the abuse that these kinds of interventions propose?
Well, you do things out of necessity. So if I'm not really in politics, but if I can if I can talk on the right-wing media, I do that. I don't have a problem with that because it's it's politics in another sense. It's cultural politics. You use what you have at the disposal. If the left is not listening, then I can put my message through using other means, and eventually I think this will change because it's really common sense. It's nothing else than that. And when the victims are starting to talk, the transitioners, then they have really the unfortunately because they've gone through all this, which is not reversible. But they have their a much stronger. Uh, they are much stronger towards the leftist audience because it's people who are saying we were pushed to do this that we regret.
Right. However, we know that the human brain is not fully developed until approximately 28, 29 years of age. So there's good reason to be concerned about anyone in their 20s doing this, I would argue.
Yeah, I always say about adults that should be left to their own devices, and you become an adult at 25 unless there is something in the pollution that is pushing back to 29 and 30 now, but it used to be 25.
Well, no, the human brain, though, isn't really fully developed until the late 20s. And legally, these people can make choices from the legal age of adulthood, which is far earlier. So I think there's a problem if we're going to say that some people are really trans, but not these. I mean, how can you maintain an argument?
I'm not saying some people are really trans. I'm saying some people who are adults, that is above 25, according to my knowledge of medicine, or 28 or 30, even if you're right, then they can make their own decisions, including this. And if they have change, if they cannot see any better way to live peacefully with their own bodies, which are not wrong. I'm not saying they are wrong. They are thinking they are wrong,
Of
but I'm
course.
not them. That's my point. I'm not supporting this, but I'm not supporting Christians as well. But if they say there's a light, there's a life after death, and they believe it, they are peacefully believing that makes their life better. Who am I to say there is not? And I have to convince you. You know, this is basic liberalism.
Of course. But there's a difference. We're not asked to reify someone's religious beliefs anymore. Once upon a time, that was the case. And that's just like my discussion with the good doctor that day. But it doesn't hurt you to call them the pronouns they want. And I told him, it absolutely does.
It's false
I have a
speech.
thinking
Yes.
brain. I am not these men's mirror. I am not your mirror. And I would refer to the Nan Golden series of photos that she did in the 80s, paradoxically, with a lot of transsexuals and transvestites. But the fact is that I am not anyone's mirror. I do not have to parrot any kind of prescribed speech. And I told him, I said, you know what? I make the best torta limone in all of Italy. How would you like it if I told you you have to call me la meglio cuoca di torta di limone in tutta Italia? And he said, oh, but that's not the same. And I said, it's absolutely the same. You actually think, if I were to do that, you think I was crazy. Well, hello, ergo. And I don't think that this culture of compassion that was driven by the left, let's just understand that some people, they don't mean to be alcoholics. Some people can't help being drug addicts. And it's very nice to be supportive of people with serious problems, sure. But overreach, in my opinion, where when it came to gender identity, we were told that we must obey the wishes of these people. And you found out in academia. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how gender ideology has presented itself within the framework of academia as an ideological colonization, because you've referred to gender
Yeah.
theory as an ideological colonization within academia. What do you mean by this? And what were the origins that are slightly different, perhaps, than in places like the UK or the US?
Well, I don't know so much about UK and US, but here there's been this wave of postmodernism, starting from Foucault. Also, when I was a student in the 80s, 90s, it was already there. So it was the anti-Marx. Everything had to be cultural, and on this, gender ideology has grown. And there was a time at the half of the 90s where Judith Butler works were translated almost immediately. Then by a very big sort of leftist publishing company, which is Feltrinelli, and they had immediate success among the elite. And now we have alias careers at universities that and the centers for that are called PUG, um, that used to be the equal opportunities centers. They are talking with this jargon of gender ideology, saying that they need to have their those with alias careers. They need to have their own gender change in the documents. And when it happened to my university, I wrote them and I told them, well, it's already correct because we don't have gender in our IDs. We have sex. So what is all about? But on the other hand, they are legally adults when they come to university, so this is much less. Um, it's much less dangerous than when it's pushed at the lower educational levels. And I must say also that it was students' associations who pushed for this. So again, to the again to square one, that the problem is how the younger generations have found in gender ideology a way of feeling themselves on the good side of history against all the rest of the world, especially their parents or the other adults that are trying to put some common sense in them, and how this has really been promoted by the higher echelons of society.
I I have taught queer theory when it came out, and it was a post-AIDS liberation of gay men and women in the early days. It was nothing like this. In fact, I've read Judith Butler. I've taught her. Nowhere in Gender Trouble, nowhere does she say that one should be out subverting gender through surgery and hormones. It was about performance. The entire book was about performance. And I know Foucault quite well, and he would have fought against this because his whole ethos and his entire life's work was against the institutionalization, the rubber stamping of identity. So I think a lot of what happened, and if you remember, or maybe you don't know this, Judith Butler won the Worst Book of the Year award when her book came out. And
Yeah, no, that was worst phrase. It was the worst phrase. Yeah.
she is unteachable. When I teach this book to graduate students, I have to choose a chapter or two because they really do not get through the language. I don't know how Feltrinelli translated it because it's a very, I'd almost say, impossible book to completely understand. Now, my first book took issue with her, and I went through two series, one from Cuba, one from Morocco, and it was very interesting to see how, from the mid 20th century, people were queering identity in these countries, but without the necessity of hormones, drugs, or even the pretense of calling oneself the opposite sex. So I think in many respects, and oh, I remember Roland Barthes, his Incident. This came out in English in the 90s, presented by D.A. Miller, in fact. And it's very interesting when you read that book by Barthes, and he's talking about cruising and going to pharmacies late night in Paris. And I'm thinking, we've lost this culture because now we're in this very prescriptive robotic culture of I click on Archigay Bologna or anywhere within Emilia Romagna, and it's frightening, honestly. It's a liturgy of why we should use proper pronouns, how endangered these people's lives are. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. We have things to do in this country related to lockdown still. A lockdown everyone pretends never happened. Meglio vedere avanti, no? And no one is talking about the mental health effects. Oh no, there was a bonus psicologo per nessun motivo, no, for no reason whatsoever. It's just a coincidence that people need psychologists all of a sudden. So I'd say there are bigger, it's like the referendum on the weekend. It was funny to see how leftists would be, oh, I'm voting no. And I'm thinking, you all are a bunch of idiots. You should be protesting a government, wasting time and money on this. The question isn't about the way the judges become separated or not and how they come to power. We should be worrying about the way in which violent crimes are assessed in this country, the way that something I've been going through, domestic violence, is assessed in this country, because it's not taken seriously if you are a certain kind of person. And I don't just mean women being abused by their partners who are men. I mean women being abused by their partners who are women. I've been fighting that fight here. It's insane. It's insane. And then the police will even tell you, well, we've been trained so much by feminist groups to only see one kind of violence. And they agree with me, right? So I think there are so many problems that need to be addressed in Italy, but the referendum was a joke because I spoke to Italians every day. I'm like, do you understand what this is about? I found not one person who understood what it was about, not one. I worry that when I go to feminist sites in Italy and I see them kowtowing to gender ideology, a lot of them do. You know this, right? They're like, nostre sorelle trans. And I'm like, oh God. Or worse, they're going off about the bloody chador. And now they're cheering the bombing of Iran. And I'm like, I want nothing to do with any of you. I want to be born a man next life. Thank you very much. I'm joking, but you know what I mean? It's insane. So, how do we move forward? Because Italy had one of the worst lockdowns in the world, along with Australia. I've talked to friends in China. It was worse than there. China was not that bad compared to here. We're not talking about that. People are not talking about serious social problems emerging from lockdown, such as hunger, homelessness, right? No one's talking about that. No one's talking about the reason for the bonus psicologo. No one's talking about the problems of employment.
There are small groups. Yeah, there's Patto per la Sanità, for example. There've been these small parties who did not overcome the hurdle in the last elections. And that's one reason why Meloni won the elections, because a lot of people voted for her that was not in the Draghi government, or for the party that was not supporting the Draghi government. So how to put together all these small forces is something that I'm not a politician, and I don't have the solution for that. I'm just trying to be a cultural activist. I do write about the horrible time that they imposed on us during these lockdowns and all the policies that has again been in favor of pharmaceutical companies, as the whole transgender ideology is, against transhumanism, trying to write about what are the real questions in politics now, which one of them is gender ideology, which is pushing back women's rights if accepted. And I'm glad that Italy, in fact, has not a single point approved of all this gender package, apart from the fact that in tribunals they are respecting this mm, European Court of Human Rights verdict. But we don't have a surrogacy, we don't have legalization of prostitution called sex work. Minors can go to gender clinics, but now the government has illuminated them, and they've made the center in Florence, in Careggi, a stop. So we are not in a very bad position for this. But gender ideology is not really discussed publicly with all the implications, because the right has their own agenda. They don't want. They want also to women to go back to their housework, not interfere too much in society's decisions. And the transhumanism. This is the other question, and technocracy that comes with it, that is not discussed. And we are going in strides towards this with the identity, the speed we have in Italy. They want to change that, I know, but we have digital identities in Italy, and all the control, the horrendous control that this allows those in power. And this is not at the center of the political debates as it should
Well,
be.
I have a guest coming on the show in a few weeks who sent me her film to see. And I tried to go and see it on Vimeo, where I also have my own films. I couldn't get in because they not only wanted to check my ID, which I sent them, they wanted to facially scan me. And I'm like, no, this goes against GDPR. I read the legislation again that night.
Okay, okay. But they are based outside Europe.
Well, it doesn't even matter because if they still have to obey EU laws in terms of asserting and assuming our rights. So I wrote them and I won. I won in the sense of I was able to get in without the facial scan because they made an exception because I was a real pain in the ass. But this worries me. So I wanted to go to your work with surrogacy and what you call contract children. You're a staunch opponent of surrogacy, which you describe as an industrialization of procreation that exploits the female body. You maintain that the woman who gives birth is the mother regardless of genetic links and regardless of who is purchasing that child. Now, there's something in Italy on par with this, and it's something that I've come across regularly here. Italy has an adoption problem, what I call a child trafficking problem. And Italy is a country that is full of children from around the global south who have been adopted by seemingly goodwill parents, but they did so simply because the actual parents of these children were poor. And because of Italy's big
Hmm.
reach around the planet through the church, it's very common. You'll see
Yeah.
children from India here. And so I've had discussions with a lot of these kids. And it's really impressive to see how many of them are going back to find their actual parents who reject what happened
Hmm.
not only to them, but they view this as a violence also of their parents who gave birth to them and were robbed
Hmm.
of them. Could you talk a bit about your work on surrogacy? And I was wondering if maybe you also touch upon this kind of child trafficking that happens through adoption, which is so prolific here.
Yeah. This has been approved legally by by a convention which is not has not been made in a framework of the UN, but in a framework of this family lawyers association based in Den Haag, in the Netherlands, which is also is I don't know whether they actually did express themselves. They were they were having consultations about surrogacy because they wanted to do the same thing with surrogacy, to give an international law, private law framework for say this is good and this is not. But maybe they did not manage to do that up to now. Um, the trick was saying that you cannot pay the woman or the family, but you can make people pay for adoption, the lawyers, the agencies, and everything else. So they constructed the market when the people who had most who needed the money most were of course excluded, the mother or the parents that were giving up the children for adoption. And the same, probably maybe they couldn't find a trick for surrogacy because the point of surrogacy is to pay the mother. This is what they needed to do. So it's this is also, I'm interested also in how in debunking also how this is presented in a very unhuman way, that a woman who gives birth is not the mother, and she believes herself not to be the mother. Apart from the cases when she does realize that she's the mother, she would like to keep on being the mother, and then everybody's trashing her because, of course, she's not the mother. She agreed, so what does she has to look for now? She better have her own. She better have thought better before. You know, this kind of very cruel things that people are saying, even in Italy, against these women who have entered this agreement because they wanted to help other people, they needed the money, whatever was their reason for doing this. And in Italy, there's a lot of talk about how we do this in a clean way, with giving all the rights to the women who are accepting to be the bearers. And the late Michela Murgia, wrote her last book about this, and I was very worried because she had and still has a lot of influence on the left. But in the end, she wrote this book that had a kind of a um, feminist position, saying, well, but the woman need to have the right to say yes or no when the baby is born. And this is not acceptable by the promoters of surrogacy, by Famiglia Arcobaleno, also in Italy, the Rainbow Families Association, which has been the first to promote surrogacy in Italy. Now there are many others, like the Radical Party and foundations that are promoting this, and I'm sure even Schlein is promoting this. So Michela Murgia said something that is absolutely not acceptable, because the whole point of surrogacy is to having these women forced to give up their babies. It doesn't matter whether they still want them or not when they are born, but they need to give them up because the babies become the product. This is absolutely misogynistic. It is against human rights of babies, according to the Stockholm Convention, that protects them from protect their family connections. The article number 8 of the Stockholm Convention says that babies are, or children in general, have the right to their own family, and when a baby is born, is very clear that his or her family is her mother, that is recognized by the baby, and the baby needs her. So this is another sign of the deep dehumanization of our society, that people on the left now, they think of mothers as somebody who can being just a provider of a child with no attachment at all, and this is not very healthy either.
Surrogacy in Italy is not yet legal, however.
Because Meloni made it illegal to come back, but with a child. But I don't know how this is whether this is effective, because they go back with the certificates. They are saying that they are their babies. So you need actively to, in order to make the new law provision work. You have to tell the people at the border that they need to investigate where somebody's coming back with a newborn. And I'm not sure they are doing this, because politics in Italy is all about how you appear, and then you don't want to change too much. Just a theater, like a theater. You make yourself big by saying, we are against surrogacy, and we approve the law that is saying that you cannot do it even abroad. But I'm not sure that people are not still doing this.
Well, how would they even know, in a way? Because feasibly they would get the passport of that child in the Italian embassy of the country where they were, etc., etc.
It no, it's very easy to check out if a woman was pregnant before going abroad and supposedly giving birth to a baby in last 9 months. So you must have some proof that you were actually pregnant.
I don't know, honestly, if that would be legal in terms of privacy. Why would I have to show my visits to my gynecologist to a border agent? This would become a real.
Because if the law requires you to do it, you have to do it.
Yeah, but those laws don't exist. The real problem here, I hate to say it, are the elite couples who want to remain slim and have children. We've seen them all over the media. And then a lot of times it's gay male couples who want children. In fact, that same doctor that tried to browbeat me into obeying pronouns, he said, "But me and my boyfriend, we can't even have children." And I said, everyone has their cross to bear. Like at a certain point, we must no, but it's really wild.
You are
It's
Catholic.
it's no, but it's shocking to me to hear a gay man who's partnered with another gay man, so they are in the top income bracket in Italy, right? They have no children, and then he's complaining about not having children. I should have said, "Why don't you help support me and my children?" I should have thought of that. I didn't. But the thing is this kind of purchase ideal that everyone has a right to a new car, a new bag, and a child is just another addition to that.
And a new child.
Yeah. No, but this is what it is. I really felt violated in a way by the way he said, "But we can't have a child." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there are heterosexual couples who cannot have children. Go talk to them. I think I did say that to him because it's just like,
Hmm.
what are your priorities here? Do the old Boston marriage thing. Go get a girlfriend, dude. I mean, prioritize. What do you want? A
Hmm.
boyfriend and to live out and proud?
Hmm.
Or I know a few fashion designers in Milano who've been married to women with an agreement to have children and then after happy lives, each one on their way.
Hmm.
I was worried about Ellie Schlein when I saw her come on the scene, honestly. I'm thinking everyone was saying, "Oh, she's so
Hmm.
progressive." And I'm like, she's like a neo-fascist to me. There's nothing leftist about her.
Hmm.
She says the right things, but then in reality, she's not really about lesbian and gay rights at all. She's about enabling,
Hmm.
I'm sure she's behind surrogacy. I would bet money on it. She's behind enabling
Hmm.
the worst parts of capitalist culture. And she calls herself a leftist. In fact, I've seen some of her comments
Hmm.
about transphobia and so forth. And she's all behind the rhetoric that would have you and me called TERFs. How do you react? And how have you responded in the past to being labeled a TERF?
I responded that I am in favor, in fact, of people changing their bodies if they're adults. So if they kept on calling me a turf, I will sue them, and it has been effective once. But I'm not so much on social media, so I think I guess people are calling me all kind of things behind my back, and I prefer to live like that.
It's just the pervasiveness of this ideology within LGBT organizations and Archie Gay especially, it seems to be getting worse. And I say that while things are already better in the UK. We've had legal victories, not just in Scotland, but the Tavistock closure was a huge victory. And there are many more on the horizon. We've seen it in the States in the first month of Trump's presidency. He shut that down. Thank you very much. That's the only good thing he did. But thank you.
No, you also put JFK Jr., RFK Jr. In charge, so that's the second good thing that he did.
Yes, well, no, he's done a few good things before, tilt. Um, but how has Italian sexual difference or the thought of pensiero della differenza influenced influenced your stance compared to a more modern Anglophone approach of gender theories?
No, actually, I'm not part of Pensiero della Differenza. We met up for our common opposition to surrogacy, but I'm not one of them. I appreciated them more with the time because when I was young, I did not find it interesting for mainly for lots of reasons, but also for their kind of what to me is in the idealization of mothers. Now I'm closer to the matriarchal researchers, and I appreciate this part of their thoughts that when I was young was one of the things that kept me off.
Now that the Zan Bill has been rejected, what do you see as the next major battleground for gender issues in Italian policy?
Well, the major battleground is still about so-called trans minors. This is not finished. This is going on behind the curtains. The Parents Association, Generazione D, is still made of people who have to hide themselves, and they are reporting that all the gender clinics that are public, they're not private in Italy, they are supporting affirmation of so-called affirmation of gender, and they are not actually giving any therapy to these kids who are in trouble. So this is still a big fight that has to be made.